Hello and welcome to chapter 10 of this Flutter course. In this chapter, we're going to look at setting up our Android phone or any Android device that you may have at hand in order for us to be able to run our Flutter code on it. And now in chapter 9, we looked at how we can run the application, basically run our Flutter application on an iOS device. And we set up the provisioning profiles, we set up the certificates. What else do we set up? The app ID at App Store on Apple's developer website. I mean, that is a lot of work to do, and you know that chapter took about an hour to explain everything. But when it then comes to the Android side, things are a lot easier. So I thought in this chapter we're going to have a look at how we can have an Android phone. For instance, in my case here, I have a OnePlus Pro 7 Pro that is connected with a USB cable to my computer. So there's nothing special about it. It's just an Android phone. And I prefer to actually, as I mentioned in the previous chapter, in chapter 9, that I prefer personally when I'm developing applications to developing Flutter applications to run my applications on a real phone or a real device as I'm testing now. You may not know this if you're coming from like a design background or a background that's not really related to mobile development previously, but if you're developing applications for only iOS, then you have something called an iOS simulator. An iOS simulator is a program that runs on your Macintosh that comes with Xcode and the iOS SDK that allows you to simulate how iOS internally works. And it allows you to install your applications from Xcode directly or from Flutter directly into the simulator and simulate basically how your application will be perceived by your actual users. If you're developing applications for Android, then there is something called an Android emulator. Now, an emulator is quite different from a simulator in that an emulator, as its name indicates, it actually tries to emulate everything about the operating system and the device. So, for instance, an Android emulator for an old device, for instance, that you may get a hold of, a device that's 5-6 years old, it will actually work slower than an Android emulator for a very modern device. But had you done the same thing for an iOS simulator and simulated an iOS device that's 5 years old, it would still perform at today's, like at your computer's speed, because it is simulating iOS. It's not actually emulating it the way it really works on a phone. So when it comes to Android, you have this possibility to run your application on an emulator, which is a lot closer to the actual device that your user will be using. So it is not the exact perfect copy in most cases. So it's not going to be like working exactly as a real physical phone, but it's a lot closer to the actual physical device than an iOS simulator. So given that background, I still prefer to run my Flutter applications on a real phone. And in this chapter, if you're interested in that, if you have an Android phone and you want to, for instance, deploy your Flutter application on an Android phone and test it while you're programming it, then this chapter is for you. Now, I also have to say that, I mean, you don't have to do this, but for the entirety of this course, I'm actually going to be, as we're developing the application, the notes application, I'm personally going to be using my Android phone so that so as we basically do hot reloads and then we write some code and we want to test it, I'm not going to show any emulator, I'm not going to show any simulator, I'm actually going to show my real Android phone working. Now, I'm not going to show it with just like, I'm not going to install the application here and just show you like this, because this is not going to work. It's not a good way of showing things to someone watching this course. So what we're going to do is, as the first task in this chapter, we are going to install an application on our computer called SCRCPY. Okay. Now, SCR-CPY is an open source project that is on GitHub with many thousand stars, and it is not like a dependency. It's not something that you're going to build into your Flutter application, but it's actually utility you're going to install on your computer. Okay, so your computer will then be able to mirror your Android phone or your Android tablet on your computer screen. So, and this SCRCPY is absolutely beautiful. It's one of my absolute favorite utilities to have when doing mobile development. And the reason behind that is that unlike the um, solution that I showed in the previous chapter, which is QuickTime Player, where you mirror your iOS telephone on your computer, but you cannot interact with that mirrored image. You still have to bring up your telephone and interact with the telephone and see the interactions either on the phone itself or on your screen. Unlike that, SCRCPY allows you to actually interact with your phone or your tablet, or your Android phone or tablet, from your computer screen. So you can actually take your mouse and then go to that screen and tap on a button, and it will actually tap on that button on your Android telephone. So it is magical, it's beautiful, it's open source and free. So if you have an Android tablet or an Android phone and you're following along with this course, I highly recommend that we install SCRCPY together, actually, as we're going to do in this course. So I'm just going to take in my notes here that I've explained that. So before actually we go about installing SCRCPY, do we need to install ADB. And this ADB is like, I believe it actually stands for Android Debugger or something. Let's see what actually ADB stands for. I'm going to bring up a Safari window here. As you can see, ADB stands for Android Debug Bridge. And ADB is a great tool if you want to, for instance, be able to talk with your Android telephone all from the command line. So you can send it a message and say, hey, take a screenshot. Hey, do this, or click here, or close this application, whatever. So you basically send commands to your Android telephone or your tablet through your terminal. It's fantastic. And with ADB, I mean, having ADB installed on your computer, then you can actually install SCRCPY, which uses ADB in order to talk to your telephone and send commands to it and receive images from it, etc. So with that said, we need to install ADB. So I'm going to close this window here, and I'm going to bring up terminal. I'm going to increase the size of this terminal window so you see what I'm doing. Okay. So in here, then I'm going to say brew install Cask Android platform tools. Okay. So this will then allow you to install, if I can, using Android platform tools, then you will be able to grab ADB from that. So Android platform tools installation actually includes ADB. All right. So I can see that, I mean, for me, you can see that I've already installed Android platform tools. So I get this message here saying that, well, you've already installed it. But if you have not installed Android platform tools before, running this command will actually install it for you. Now, I don't want to reinstall it, so I'm just not going to do this suggested command here. But just know that before you install SCRCPY, you will need to get ADB up and running. Okay. And that comes in Android platform tools. All right. So let me just go into my notes and say that we've talked about ADB. So after you've done ADB, we need to go and I'm going to bring up Safari again. Let's see if I can bring up the window here so you can see what I'm doing as well. Then I'm going to say SCRCPY. Okay, and then you will see that the first suggested website is on GitHub, and this is exactly where you need to go. So go to SCRCPY here, and you will see information about how you can actually install SCRCPY. And it says on Linux, you can do apt install SCRCPY. On Windows, you can do a download here. And on Mac OS, then you can do brew install strcpy. So I've already done that. So I've already actually installed strcpy, so I don't have to do anything special. And you can see it actually tells you here. Now, I'm going to increase the size of this window so you can see a little bit better. And it will tell you here that you need ADB accessible from your path. If you don't have it yet, then do that command that I mentioned to you, okay? So after you've done the installation on your computer, then you should be able to bring up a terminal. So I'm going to bring up terminal here. And as you can see here, I have my Android telephone, and the screen looks like this right now. So it's just on the home screen, nothing special. Then I want to bring up strcpy. But before you do that, if this is the first time you're doing this process, you will probably need to enable something called USB debugging on your Android telephone. And depending on how what your Android phone looks like or what it is, the USB debugging, when you plug your Android telephone, it will kind of show you a screen like this. So I'm going to enlarge this a little bit so you can see better. So this dialog will pop up on your Android telephone saying that, oh, do you want to allow this computer to do debugging on this telephone? And what you need to do is just to say always allow from this computer and then press the OK button. This is only so that you will be, first of all, able to install and debug your Flutter applications all from Visual Studio Code or from Android Studio right on your Android telephone or tablet. And also it will allow you to run strcpy, which in turn uses ADB in order to communicate with your device. Okay, so that is for USB debugging. All right. So what we need to do is actually bring up strcpy. So in terminal, I'm just going to say strcpy. And as you can see here, it's going to talk to my Android telephone, and it brought up a window which I'm going to slowly bring here to this screen so you can see. So I'm going to leave the terminal here because the terminal is actually fueling this thing. So if I close my terminal, this is also going to be closed. So just keep this terminal open. Or if you're using iTerm, for instance, like I'm using, then you can bring up a new tab and continue working with another command line. Otherwise, you can just close it. Or you can just minimize this if you're bothered by it. So as you can see now, I have my Android phone here mirrored on my screen. I'm actually going to do this so you can see it a little bit better. And I'm going to bring it right here in between. So this is my actual Android phone. So if I click here with my mouse, it actually interacts with my phone. So I can bring up my phone here. So you kind of see them side by side. And if on the strcpy screen here, I press the back button, you will see that my Android screen changes. One more time, click on Google. So it's really interacting with my Android telephone here, okay? So I highly suggest that you actually install strcpy, to be honest with you. It's a great tool if you're into mobile development or if you want to become a mobile developer. So, and regarding what I said earlier about devices, I think you will get really far with the iOS simulator and the Android emulator. However, I personally should suggest that you spend and invest some money into getting devices for yourself. They don't have to be top of the line, latest devices, but one Android telephone and one iOS telephone, or even tablets will do, but preferably telephones. You don't even have to have SIM cards in them, just the telephone device physically itself. So and I mean, if you're getting into mobile development, you will kind of, after many years, kind of have a lot of telephones anyways, because you will get like this year's new telephone, and then 2 years later, you get another telephone. So you kind of pile them up. And you could use those old telephones then as test telephones, as we call them. All right. So that's that part. Now, what we need to do next is now that our Android phone is connected here, what we need to do is to go to Visual Studio Code into our project and choose that So choose our, let me see, bring up Visual Studio Code here. If I can, Visual Studio Code, this is, I have so many screens here, so it's a little bit of a challenge to actually line them up all here. So what I'll do here is I will get rid of the side window, all right? And I will bring up then strcpy on the right-hand side and then just resize the screen a little bit here and then like this. So this is like my usual setup. So I have Visual Studio Code here on the left, and then I have my Android phone mirrored on the right-hand side, okay? So what then you'll need to do after you've done all of this work is in Visual Studio Code, just say Command Shift P on Mac or Control Shift P on Linux and um, Windows. And if you're using Android Studio, I don't, to be honest with you, know the commands there to select a device in Flutter. They may be like a drop down or something, so please do that. So here I'm just going to say Command Shift P and I'm going to say Flutter select device, okay? And in select device, I'm actually going to choose my Android telephone, which is the one being mirrored here. Choose the Android phone, and then I'm going to say run without debugging. Okay. So let's then see that you can see here, it says launching Dart on GM19, blah, blah, in debug mode. So since it's an Android application now, all of a sudden we just switch from iOS to Android. Previously, our application was being like our source code was being compiled by Xcode. And now, since we're trying to deploy to an Android telephone, it's the Gradle. It's Gradle basically that's taking care of the build process. So if you're an Android developer, then you know that basically Gradle is your build system, and yeah, it is working. It is basically doing the build in the background. So I'm actually so glad that we got this error right now. So I'm going to tick here in my notes that we've talked about in VS Code, select Android, and then show Android phone mirroring working. Okay. So you see here, we got some errors actually when we talked about in chapter, what chapter are we on? We are in chapter 10. In chapter 9, when we talked about running our application on iOS, we actually got something similar. There was an error saying that, oh, your dependencies, Firebase, they need this version, but you're on that version. And the code that actually solved it, if you remember, we went to our pod file and just put this platform here saying iOS 13, because you see, we have 4 dependencies at the moment. We have Firebase auth, we have Firebase core, analytics, and something else, which I don't remember. Let me have a look at the notes here. There were core auth, Cloud Firestore, and Firebase Analytics. These 4 dependencies, they have their own requirements. So they say that we as dependencies cannot be installed on an application that, for instance, supports a very old Android OS or a very old iOS version. So these dependencies are putting requirements on your project. So, and we fixed that, yes, in chapter 9, we fixed that by going into the pod file and commenting out this, basically removing the comment from this line and changing it from 9 to 13. So we fixed it like that for iOS. But how do we do it for Android? Now, we get a lot of great information here, and it says that you kind of need to find this default config and min SDK version. Okay, so let's look for default config. So I'm going to copy that text, and I'm going to then Command Shift F in Visual Studio Code and search for it. And as you can see here, we have a little Flutter version name and then Flutter version code to integer. And I can see here there is information about Flutter versions, like if you go to our build Gradle, and there is a Flutter version code to integer that is the, and there, where's the min SDK here? Min SDK version, okay? So I'm gonna search for min SDK version, and here I can see it is 19, here it is 19, and Android min SDK version 19. So there's actually quite a lot of places where 19 is mentioned, all right? And the error itself, let's read it. Requires a higher Android SDK version. Fix this by adding the following to the file build Gradle. Android default config min SDK version. Okay, so if we look at the default config here, it's talking about this thing, min SDK version. I can see that previously this used to be a number, and recently it has been changed to Flutter min SDK version. So I'm going to bring up a Safari window, and I'm going to say change Flutter min SDK version. So let's see what people are actually suggesting. Is there a good command that allows us to do this? You see, people are still saying that we need to do it like that by changing it to a specific version, but I believe there should be a better way of doing this instead of hard coding it. With the new Flutter project, with the Flutter style, you're enabled to change the min SDK version in local properties. Great. Okay, so if we go to a file called local.properties, that's what they're saying here. So I'm gonna try to find local properties, and I can see here there's an SDK set here, but there is no min SDK version. So we probably need to just go and fix that up. So I'm going to copy paste, and I'm just going to say flutter.min SDK version 19. Okay, save that file. Then I'm going to go back to the main Dart and then say run without debugging. Let's see what happens this time. And if it accepts that local properties change that we just made. And it's still saying that it won't be able to users running. So what we could do in here, to be honest with you, is just troubleshooting. So let's just say go back to the root folder of your application and say Flutter clean Android. Why is it doing the Xcode workspace? And then say Flutter pop get. So if this works properly, then it should have cleaned the Android code for us and like put the version 19 in our build Gradle. Like this should actually resolve to 19. So let's go to main Dart and just give it one more try. If this solution doesn't work, then we unfortunately have to go into our build Gradle file and do what was recommended and put the min SDK version there as a constant value of 19 just to get the code compiling. So let's have a look here at what our Gradle build is going to do. So I don't really know what happened with it. It doesn't seem to really be doing anything. So one more try, run without debugging and see what happens. Launching. I'm going to have a look at my Android phone here as well. Running Gradle task assemble debug. And for me, it's not running anything at the moment on this phone. So what we're going to do is let's go to, I mean, this solution didn't work. So I'm going to remove that and I'm going to go to build Gradle and put the target SDK version. I think that was the min SDK version, sorry. And here we're just going to say 19 instead, okay? Like that, like it was actually suggested to us. So let's then go to main Dart and then say run without debugging one more time. And if this solution doesn't work, I may actually have to like restart the Visual Studio Code if it's gotten confused for some reason. Because usually when you say Gradle, like when you start the build process, it actually gives you some feedback. It either says that something failed or that, yeah, it then ran successfully. And in this case, I can see it's not running. So I'm just going to say quit Visual Studio Code. Okay. And then I'm going to bring up Visual Studio Code. So I have a lot of projects usually. So I'm going to minimize all of these things. And I'm going to only open our My Notes application. So let's go in there to our My Notes application and let's give this a try one more time. I'm going to go to run without debugging and let's see what happens. Oh, now it's choosing iPhone 13 Pro in debug mode. So that's because I restarted Visual Studio Code and it doesn't know which device to run on. So I'm going to say select device and then choose my Android phone again. Run without debugging. And hopefully, crossing my fingers here, that since we've changed the version number, then it's going to work. And I can see here, I see. So now it's complaining about multi-deck. So, I mean, this is great stuff. I'm so glad that we're seeing all of these errors because usually we don't have the possible. I mean, usually you see in tutorials that, yeah, everything's working fine. He clicked there and everything worked. But here we're actually getting to the point where you see every issue that could arise, and then we're going to fix it together. And this is like a day in the life of a software developer. Things go wrong, but then you'll have to fix it. So this multi-dex is something that you will have to configure. We're going to say use multi-dex flag. So I'm going to go to Safari, and I'm going to paste it here. And then there's a solution, hopefully somewhere in our default config. You see it says multi-dex enabled. So let's go to your to the build Gradle in app, which is right here. You see Android app build Gradle. In your default config, as it says here, multi-dex enabled, just bring it here, paste it there, and then go to your dependencies at the bottom of this file right here and bring implementation multi-dex right there. Okay, so I'm just going to paste it right there. Go back to my main Dart file here and then say run without debugging. So let's see what happens. And there are some warnings here. They're printed in red. You don't have to worry about them so much right now. They're warnings, as their name suggests. So you don't have to worry so much, to be honest with you, as I mentioned. So there we go. Here is our Flutter application now working and running on the actual phone. So I'm going to bring then the phone here, and you can see it is showing the exact same thing. So if I, with my mouse, go over, you can't see that because you're actually seeing my face. So, and then you will see the value 3 printed here as well. So that's great stuff. Then I don't know why this screen is rotated. I rotate it back. Oh, it's because my phone is actually rotated. So I'm gonna rotate it back so it's not rotated in the wrong orientation. Great. So we got a lot of problems, to be honest with you there, but that's okay. That's usually what happens when we're working with mobile development, at least in the beginning when you're doing the setup. So I'm actually grateful that we're getting these errors so you see them, so you don't just think everything is going to work from the absolute beginning. So even though, as I said in the introduction, I haven't planned all of this, that these errors come up, I don't want things to be perfect. So even though that is happening, but I'm still quite grateful that they are happening. So what we need to talk about now is something called screen sleeping. And as you're developing your application on your Android telephone or tablet, you'll notice that you will run your application on the phone or the tablet, and then after a short while, your screen will go to sleep, which means the screen will be locked. And then when you try to then rerun your application or refresh your application, then you will get an error from Flutter saying that it cannot deploy the application because the device is locked. So that is quite annoying that the telephone does it, but it is for a good reason. The telephones, like for security purposes, they have to lock the screen so that if you leave it somewhere on a bench or something in a park and you just forget it and you go away, then it is locked, so no one's going to get access to your telephone's data. With that said, what we need to do is disable it while you're developing your applications, because what you want is a telephone that's always there, is available. The screen doesn't lock, so you can always deploy a newer version of our application to it, or as long as you don't lock it yourself manually. So what we're going to do is I'm going to bring up the phone here, so you see what I'm doing. I'm going to go here. I'm going to go to the settings screen here, and you will probably need to, in order for you to actually even be able to run your application and do funky things with your application on your telephone, you need to enable something called developer mode. So developer mode on Android and on iOS is a series of development tools that the phone provides only to developers. And in order to get those tools, you need to perform a series of actions like a monkey or something on your telephone. And I'm not going to provide instructions exactly how to do that for all different phones, because depending on the manufacturer of your telephone, especially if it's an Android, then developer mode is brought into life in a different way. So what you need to do is to find out the manufacturer of your telephone and the model of your telephone. Here is a OnePlus Pro 7, I believe. then Google that and say OnePlus Pro 7 developer options or developer mode. Then you'll get some information about how to enable that. I've already done that. So if I go to, I believe it's utilities, or sorry, I think it's system, then you can see then I have an option called developer options. Okay. So in order to disable screen sleeping, you have to go to developer option and say stay awake. And that is by default disabled. All right. So we've now then talked about developer tools, and we've talked about that you can interact with your telephone using strcpy. So to be honest with you, I think that's all you need to know um, for the Android setup. There is not much more to talk about. The rest is just developing our application as usual, and then running it on the Android phone, and then mirroring the screen using a CRCPY. So that's what I'm going to do for the entirety of this course. I'm going to primarily run our application that we're going to develop in this course on this telephone and mirror the screen using a CRCPY. But you may choose to use an iOS simulator or an Android emulator or an iOS phone or a tablet, whatever. So I can't provide descriptions about how to do all of those things because that is a complete course of its own. But at least now you have the tools, the necessary information in order to understand how you can actually deploy to an iPhone and an Android phone. All right. So with that said, now we can say that we're actually good to go on Android. And in the next chapter, which is chapter 11, we're going to get to some juicy stuff, which is setting up our project on Firebase. And if you remember from the introduction, we're going to use Firebase for our backend. So then you know what's coming in the next chapter. And now you have the tools necessary in order to get the app running. So with that said, then let's go and configure our Firebase project in chapter 11.